and hit record. Like all of the sessions this week during our Digital Credentials Summit, this session is recorded and it will be available on the event website a couple hours after it finishes up. I'm happy to welcome you to Transdisciplinary Competencies and Communities of Practice. We get to hear some from colleagues at the ASU Herberger Institute for the Design and the Arts. Rowan and I were chatting a little bit about the challenges of the arts community that they faced, like many of us did when the pandemic started last year. So I'm excited to see and hear how they approach this and what this looks like for them. We will have time for the Q&A at the end. You are all entering here on mute, but it's a small group here, and so we'd love to hear from you at the end, and so you'll be invited to turn yourself off mute or write a message or question in the chat. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and cede the rest of the session to our hosts today. So thank you, Rowan, Toby, and Stephanie, and please take it away.
Well, welcome everybody. Good morning. It's good to be here. Welcome to Design and Arts Core, Transdisciplinary Competencies and Communities of Practice. To get started, let's introduce the speakers. I'll start with myself. My name is Rowan Defaria. I am the director for Herberger Online Learning at the Herberger Institute. And I lead a team of educational technologists, instructional designers, with the purpose of servicing our Dean's Office and the academic units associated with the Dean's Office at the Herberger Institute. And I will say that I'm also a musician, as most of our team members are. Not only do they do a function of education or educational technology, but they have usually a bent to the arts or creative artists as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie.
Hello, I'm Stephanie. I am the Associate Dean of Students and the Director of the Design and Arts Core, and my art form is theater, with a specialty in working in and with communities. And Toby.
Thanks. My name's Toby Kidd. I am the manager of Herberger Online Learning. I work underneath Rowan Defaria. I've been working in the arts education, online education space for about 10 years. And as Rowan mentioned, I have background as an artist. My master's degree is actually in vocal performance. So I am a classically trained singer. I also have a bent towards technology and a passion for higher ed, which is how I find myself here working for the Herberger Institute.
So just to provide a little bit of context, the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts has 5 academic units: arts, media, engineering, art, design, film, music, dance, and theater. Our mission is really to position designers, scholars, educators at the center of public life, and to help educate, to help put forward creative capacities that will have an impact in the world. So it's a large mission, and one of the things that we feel we are uniquely positioned to execute on, or to really advance, is this idea that if we have that many academic units under one roof, we can really put forward education pathways that will work at the intersection between subjects, fields, programs, and areas. And that's not only for the creative arts. That's what we are doing here. And then in the larger ecosystem of Arizona State University, how does that connect to fields outside of the creative arts, and how do we create an ecosystem that will allow students and folks to really learn at the intersection? And in addition, how do we create, let's say, a cauldron of an interaction that occurs between faculty, between the community, between experts in the outside world, bringing these all together to create education, to create impact that can then be turned into the world and actually have a tangible effect on what we do. Again, placing the creative arts at the center life, of cultural life of the public. One of the things that is really being advanced at ASU in the larger ecosystem and not only at the institute but at the enterprise level is advancing universal learning and evolving a model that allows us to provide or target and help learners at every stage in their life and target what they need depending on what their situation is. And so one way we look at this we're very aware that a paramount way of being able to really put forward tangible, effective ways to anybody who is learning at any stage. There is a lot of power to look at this from a modular standpoint, from micro-credentialing, from intelligently learned pathways. And so we are very interested in continuing to advance fast and rapidly an ecosystem that can deploy modularly to multiple formats, to multiple audiences. And that brings us, of course, straight to digital credentialing and the power of that to realize some of our mission and some of our goals. And so the Digital Arts Corps is one example of that in how we are using the digital credentialing, how we are thinking about it. And with that, I want to turn it over to Stephanie, who will talk a little bit more about that.
So I just want to share a brief video that gives you kind of an overview on what the Design and Arts Corps is, and then we can talk about how we've designed it and what creativity we were able to use given our constraints in the Herberger. Toby, do you mind playing that? Oops.
I am happy to. I need to share with audio, so just 1 second. Share sound.
Hopefully it won't be, it's not very long, so hopefully it's not all laggy, yuck.
The Design and Arts Corps partners with communities to place designers, artists, scholars, and educators in public life, in places like schools, hospitals, social profit organizations, community centers, and government agencies. Using creativity, these partnerships advance culture and well-being, strengthen democracy, and imaginatively address today's most pressing challenges. For example, what happens when artists partner with scientists to communicate and advance research? How much more relevant can parks become when designers are invited to work with the families who use those parks? How can we transform senior centers into hubs of meaningful community-driven arts and culture? What happens when designers and artists reimagine waiting rooms at the motor vehicle division? When fully realized, the Design and Arts Corps will be the largest socially engaged design and arts program in the nation. All Herberger Institute students will participate at least once during their studies through associated coursework, projects, and partnerships. The Design and Arts Corps changes what design and arts schools can do in the world. Come be a part of re-envisioning our future. Together, we can make the world a better place.
So the Design and Arts Corps, will you make it go forward, Toby? Thank you.
The Design and
There we go. So the Design and Arts Corps is built to work at the edges of the university and community. And we had several constraints in our design. And then the way we addressed it has relevancy for credentialing. So the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, like Rowan told you, is the largest arts and design school in the United States. And we have over 6,000 students in over 125 degree programs and certificate programs. And as you can imagine, to build something that can, one, serve that entire population as well as be authentically in relationship to our community partners, ethically in relationship with our community partners. And then third, that addresses the time constraints of many of our programs, particularly our professionally licensures programs, which have such tight scheduling. Very few of those folks have more than one elective credit. So in order to build something that could serve all 6,000 students and be relevant in the multiple communities to whom we are responsible, we backwards designed it. So what we first did is ask our stakeholders at all different levels, from elementary school children to governmental agencies to social profit organizations to our religious partners across the Southwest, what would a socially engaged program be able to accomplish? And so we built the theory of change. What can we accomplish using an ecological model drawn from public health? So we took a public health framework about how do we add capacities into communities rather than sapping capacities. And so this is the theory of change, and you can fart around with it on the website all you want to look at what we built. And then what we did is we vibrated back and forth. Toby, do you mind advancing? We vibrated back and forth in building the curriculum. So the first thing is that we needed the curriculum to spiral back and forth between these competencies that are also drawn from, so they're drawn from the liberal arts, kind of basic liberal arts. They are also built on career competencies from several national organizations as well. So we're looking at what are those soft skills that allow our students, no matter what their disciplinary practice is, to be ethically in relationship with our community partner, and so it's experiential, and know what they need to know in order to use their creativity to advance well-being understood in a large level. So our curriculum has, we go back and forth, but it's about 16 general topic areas that are then modularly designed to go from benchmark through to capstone. And so these modules then were also built in the same way that we did the design for the program as well. So it is a laterally designed curriculum. So each of the modules are about 90 minutes and have been collectively designed with our community partners, with our students. So there's student to student learning from our faculty, of course, and staff. And so I'm going to turn it over to Toby.
Thanks, Stephanie. Now that we have kind of an understanding of what the Design and Arts Core is, we thought it would be good to talk through the state of digital credentialing at ASU and some of the strides we've been able to make in that area. The first thing I wanted to talk about was something we have formed at ASU a few years ago called the Learning Futures Collaboratory. A very fancy name, but essentially what it functions as an incubator for adopting new technology and educational technology across campus. So looking at things like AR, VR, XR, digital credentials, obviously, universal learner record, digital campuses, all of these really new innovative technologies that can be a huge force for good, but if not implemented consistently, can actually be a detractor and not be as beneficial to the learner at the end of the day. With an institution the size of ASU, this is a huge concern. As we talk about the size of just the 6,000 students in the Herberger Institute, that's just our arts and design school. So we have a very large institution that we have to try and wrangle together to make sure we're not duplicating work in the different disciplines across the university. So within the Learning Futures Collaboratory, we have the digital credential work stream, which was about a transdisciplinary group of over 80 people. I don't know the final number we landed at, but these people all came together to look at 4 major areas of development within digital credentials and create a baseline recommendation for adoption across campus. So we looked at issuance and criteria, evidence and assessment, design and brand, and lastly, outreach. And this all culminated with our own digital credentialing summit, much like this one here for IMS. And it actually happened right after the pandemic. So we did a fully remote conference when we were, kind of just fresh into everything. But it was a really good opportunity for us to present our findings and our decision-making process with the broader ASU community, leadership, and present the pilots that we were going to be putting forward over the coming year. Fast forward now, it's a year later, and we've been completing pilots of which one of which is actually the Design and Arts core. So hopefully, as we move forward within the ASU ecosystem, we'll be seeing a little bit more adoption of digital credentials in a more organic way, now that we have a pretty firm baseline understanding of what that can look like at an institution like ours. So our program of choice, or our software of choice, was Badger Pathways. There are obviously many that will work for open badging, but the way we handle Design and Arts core specifically is that we built the foundations, these foundations modules into our first pilot. So these 6 foundations credentials would then had resulted in the completion credential to earn your foundations badge. As Stephanie mentioned, there are plans for other modules. These are in development right now. So this was our initial pilot, but we're looking ahead to the future already to incorporate these as many as 4 tiers of achievement in each of these topic areas. And these aren't all structured the same way in pathways, the way we've seen with the foundations. These upcoming badges will be able to be restructured and reformed in different ways for students to meet the individual learner needs. And it truly becomes a more personalized learning approach when you can say that, this student needs to achieve to a certain level in this subject area, but not necessarily in this other one. So it's more targeted learning that can be deployed to students in a more personalized way. There are 4 different deployments we have for these modules currently, and Stephanie, feel free to chime in if I misrepresent any of these, but we have an actual Design and Arts core course. So students can enroll in this course and complete the modules as a part of their coursework. We then have individual modules that can be shared out with other courses as just a singular modular experience. And that can be within the Herberger Institute or also external to other programs across the university. For example, the self-care module was co-developed with the College of Health Solutions on campus. So we tried to look for ways to make this as transdisciplinary as possible. There's also kind of a co-curricular experience of an individual student choosing to learn on their own. And then lastly, our continuing and professional education arm of the university, which is targeted towards external professional development opportunities. So in all of these things, there's a huge concern for us to have consistency and a really strong understanding of how assessments and evidence can work in these various capacities. And so with this next slide, hopefully this doesn't seem, after this week, it doesn't seem as a surprise to see this process outlined here. But really what we're focusing on is between steps 3 and 4, this process of submitting evidence. These modules all vary between types of engagement and evidence that the learner has to submit. The assessments can be self-led submissions, or they can be things that require instructor intervention. A really good example of this is one module asks the learner to make a personal value statement, and that doesn't have a right or wrong answer, and that doesn't need an authoritative sign-off to make sure that they did it right. I suppose a learner could put a bogus or perhaps an inaccurate value statement out there, but at the end of the day, the only person that suffers from that would be the learner themselves. And so it's looking towards this, empowerment of the learner, and also placing a little bit more responsibility on them to complete the assessment and provide an appropriate amount of evidence so that their credential has value to them in the outside world. Other experiences are more moderated, and they won't be applicable for an audience without an instructor presence in them. there's more of a concern for the quality of work, and it's a more participatory experience as opposed to just being able to make a statement. So with that, we now have a good understanding of credentials and how we've deployed them for Design and Arts Core. I'd like to pass it back to Rowan for some final notes to wrap us up.
I was on mute. Yeah, and if we can maybe have some time for some questions. Just in summary, and this doesn't come to a surprise of anybody here, I'm sure, but really we are following, as we look forward at ASU and within the Herberger Institute, and then moving forward, really promoting learning at the intersection. What we are presenting here is, and digital credentialing has a really a key cornerstone for us to really deliver on some of the things we want to do. We definitely are continuing to work and look at curriculum to leverage really an intelligent design for learning paths and the building of content that can be deployed in ways that will be that will compound and become more and more usable for different learning paths. We want to provide a pedagogical framework to target all the domains. Of key importance is how do we always have the saying within the Herberger Institute, how do we find humanity in the digital learning space? How do we do this better? How do we do it so that it really has an impact to the learner 360 degrees, not just, let's say, cognitively, effectively, always. And of major importance and as a mandate for us is engaging the community in ways that is meaningful and that has impact. And again, this of course doesn't come to a surprise to anybody in the field of instructional design, learning, pedagogy. We want to really be able to do this to provide real life experiential learning. And again, just as we saw with the Digital Arts Core, incorporate 21st century learning skills. And I think with that, let's turn it over to any questions that anybody might have. And we can either use the chat, but I don't think we have that. Actually, we probably could have open mic as well if somebody wants to raise their hand. If they have a question.
I can probably kick us off with one question just to get the conversation started. We had Luke who asked a question in the chat a few minutes ago. And his question was, how have we helped the community of students and faculty understand the difference between prerequisite badges and completion badges? Which I think is a really good question. And if I don't mind answering that one quickly. From the difficulty in translating technology to what tends to be a traditionally non-technically capable audience or a non-technically savvy audience is helping them just to understand the different ways that it could work. I don't think there is a right or wrong way to leverage completion badges versus prerequisite badges. But the way I have framed my thinking about them would be a completion badge is something that you get simply by doing the required elements. In the example of Design and Arts Core, that foundation's completion badge, that's issued automatically once the learner has completed all of these 6 required badges. There's no additional work to be done there. Whereas a prerequisite would be something you have to do before you can do the next one. So, making that like an actual actionable pathway through one module to the next. I think you could easily affect that same experience just by making something a prerequisite. But maybe that's something where you might have to look at the individual features to determine, does this automatically get issued or does this need manual review? And in most cases, I think the simplest answer is probably the right one, where if it looks like it's going to, the documentation implies it, I think it would be right. I don't know if that helps at all, Luke.
Any other questions from those in attendance? I'll ask y'all one. This is really exciting, and I think many of us have been heads down in technology and don't get to hear about the art side. So thank you so much for pushing this forward. And I'm wondering if there's anything on any of your radars that you're really excited to build out in the year or two ahead.
So part of so ASU is not a land grant institution, so our funding comes through student credit hours and through it's this arcane, complex calculus that nobody really understands. But student credit hour, I'm sure that this probably is true for many of y'all as well. The problem with competency-based